The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody. This evening we are very excited to get kicked off with the AWS Solutions Architect Associate exam, and we are pleased to announce that we're going to be doing this for the rest of the month. We've got a very exciting series. Actually, I'm going to be throwing myself to the wolves and presenting in a couple of weeks too. But this evening we've got the illustrious Nick Coyler. Nick, how do you pronounce your last name, please?
Coyler.
Thank you, sir. Nick Coyler. He's at vNickC, and so a couple of housekeeping notes before we get going. We've got the VM Underground opening acts starting. If you go to vmunderground.com, if you're going to VMworld, check it out. It's really fun. I will be both Chris Malhoit and I will be monitoring the Twitter hashtags and the live Q&A feed. So please feel free to ask lots of questions. I know there's going to be a lot. I know I'm going to have some. Tonight's hosts are me, Chris Williams at Mistwire, and Chris Malhoit at mpbiz.com. So without further ado, because I know everybody wants me to stop talking, I'm going to give this over to Nick. All right, Nick, and you're good to go.
All right, let me get things fired up over here.
Huzzah, I can see your screen.
All right, good to go. Let me just clear the Citrix GoToMeeting. Oh, that'll clear the webinar. I don't want to do that. There we go. All right, yeah. So thanks everyone for joining, and pretty excited to be here. And thanks to the vBrownbag team for inviting myself and a number of my head colleagues on here to kind of really get started with this AWS Solutions Architect exam. We're pretty excited. I can say about probably 8 of my colleagues are currently have taken or in progress to take this exam. So it seems to be the hottest cert around right now, and people are kind of moving up very quickly through these AWS certs, and I think that just kind of echoes the traction that AWS has got recently. A little bit about me for anybody who doesn't know. So 15 years in IT. I currently I spent the last 6 years actually in the cloud automation side. I worked for TransUnion, the credit bureau, for a while, and then Catamaran, a pharmaceutical company, leading a lot on the cloud and the automation side. And then the last 2.5 years, I really moved into a role where I help very large Fortune 100 companies. In my role, I had lead a team of people that help them kind of embrace cloud and manage it successfully. Also got a blog on the bottom left there. Definitely check it out, and any code I use here, I'll definitely make available for you.
Oh, sorry, I should have put that in.
I love hearing from you guys on Twitter. Yep, no worries at all. Feel free to guess where I'm from at the end, but there's a few clues for you there. It seems to be the running joke these days, but let's get going. So I think there's a ton of content, just on the vBrownbag site. The link on the left there, the professionalvmware.com. There's the exam blueprint, and then Chris Williams is helping host this. Here's some great study notes from the material he's been going through. Definitely I found it very handy, so I highly recommend it. The exam blueprint itself, if you kind of pull it up, I'll actually just bring it up on the website here quickly so you can kind of see it. If you look through it, it doesn't give a lot of specifics. It's sort of the usual general IT knowledge and various pieces you've got to cover. We're focusing today specifically on domain 1. I'll zoom in on this a little bit more, but you'll see there's really 4 domains. Domain 1, designing highly available, cost-efficient, fault-tolerant, scalable systems. Domain 2, which I believe we're starting in September, right, Chris, on vBrownbag as well. We'll kind of move into that series. Domain 3 is data security, and then domain 4 is really around troubleshooting. But 60% of the actual certification is really focused on domain 1 here, which is where we're gonna focus today. For anyone who's not aware of just the Amazon certs and where they fit, there's kind of if you look at the left side of this diagram, we really have like the considered the solutions architect. Generally I would say people that shift more to the kind of the left, if you will, on the kind of the infrastructure background. But you're going to learn more about the whole series of services in AWS. The certifications on the right, more associated, aimed, I should say, for the developers. The developer associate one is very much focused more on things like Elastic Beanstalk and other things where developers want to get up and running quickly, as opposed to kind of the overall. And in the SysOps administrators associate, that track there, there's generally recommended that you kind of follow from left to right on the bottom if you're going to go ahead for the SysOps one. But if you're just going to stay in the Solutions Architect track, then you just start at the Solutions Architect Associate and then move up to the to the professional one. So with this part, the way, again, domain one, we're going to focus on, content may include the following: how to design cloud services, planning and design, monitoring and login, and then familiarity with just a whole bunch of AWS technology. So as you'll see very shortly, we're going to kind of give you the tour of the AWS landscape. In particular, for part one, I'll kind of, show you how the series has been broken down. We worked with the vBrownbag team and, how we wanted to kind of carve this up. And so we are here, top left, the beginning part of the series, architecture overview, plan and design. We're going to cover, more of the AWS concepts and then the planning. And, and I'm going to go into a couple of real-world use cases at the end, just from what we actually see customers implementing, because I think, it's one thing to get all this done on, paper and book reading, but hearing some real-world examples, at least for me, always helps, solidify things. Next week, Tim Carr is going to be going through the HA versus cost, RDS versus EC2. Then we're on to kind of the subsequent ones after that. And Chris is speaking, 824 there on, some of the networking pieces in particular. So let's kind of jump through here. Let's start off with the AWS platform. And I think this diagram, and you've probably seen this in other training modules for anyone that's kind of already, started their certification training. Amazon divides everything up into these categories. And we're going to start from the bottom. We've got AWS Global Infrastructure. Then we've got networking, so that's going to be things like VPCs, etc., that we'll get into. Then we kind of keep going up the infrastructure layer. So if you see, we've got compute, storage, and content delivery network, and databases. Again, moving up, now we're into analytics, security and identity, management tools, and then further on up, and we'll kind of hit all these. I'm not going to go through them all now because we're going to hit more all in detail. But you can see, there's just a ton to go through. We're going to learn, at a high level. Some people call it like this 10,000-foot view, right, of AWS and what all these services do. And, and Amazon believes for the certification, you just need to have a fundamental understanding, at least, of what these services are. Now, you may not use all of them. I can say real world today, I probably use about 15 of these, probably at most, that I've actually kind of worked with customers on. But, on the app side, you're going to use a very different mix than, say, people on the infrastructure side. But the idea is that we need to know how they all come together. So there's a lot to cover here. I'd say just keep calm. There's probably information overload in this course in particular. I think particularly today as we kind of hit every single service one at a time. But just keep calm and enjoy some tea, and I think we'll get through this pretty good. So let's start off with the infrastructure layer, and the first thing really to cover is just excuse me, just what Amazon means by what we call availability zones and regions, right? So if you think of your regions, they're the number one thing to look at first of all, and you can see, we've got a bunch of regions in America. So you've got kind of US East, US West that you guys are probably very familiar with. The EU, you've got the Frankfurt and the Ireland, regions there. South America's got them. All over the globe basically. Currently, not a region in Africa, but hopefully coming very soon. There's a lot of talk about a region in South Africa in particular, so hopefully that will be coming very soon. So those are the regions, and you're generally going to use a region. One could be latency requirements, the other could be regulatory requirements. I think just take the recent Brexit vote in the UK. I mean, it's a very good example now of maybe those EU regions aren't acceptable from a data locality standpoint. So some companies are going to have to move that data into a UK region, for example. Availability zones, think of those more as individual isolated areas where you're going to be where they could fail, and then you could fail over to another availability zone. Think of them almost like, I wouldn't say necessarily a separate data center, but a separate set of hardware, if you will. So you're kind of covered. If that availability zone goes down, another one in the same region isn't going to go down. That's the way they're designed around there, and that's important. I'll get into some of the availability zone design and how you kind of do it around the actual applications. But for now, just kind of be aware of that. You'll hear a term just AZ a lot. That's the acronym for availability zone. Again, think of it generally as a data center for the most part. And the other thing you'll hear a lot about is what's called edge locations. And they're all over the globe basically, and they're basically content delivery network endpoints for CloudFront. So you might decide, okay, I'm going to host my data here, but I want somebody to come into it from this endpoint, and you'll use you'll need to be aware of the edge locations for that when you're architecting your applications. So So that's really kind of at the core. The other thing to think about, just as a visual, each region is completely independent, right? So if I just quickly log out here, and if we go into the Amazon console, just find one that's open here. And if you look on the top right of the screen, there's a drop down. You can see we're currently in US East. Each one of these is completely separate. So if I go into, say, US East and I go to EC2, again, we'll come into some of these later on, you're going to see in here is, my instances. Now, if I go to another region, let's say the EU, into Ireland, just wait for it to pop up here. We can see I don't see those instances there. So think of it as completely separated, entirely. And so when you're in the Amazon console, you're only going to see the items that are in your specific region. Now, if you scroll down, if you look at the resources, if you scroll down on the page, you'll see your overall service health, and you'll see the availability zone status as well. So like US East 1A, 1C, 1D, 1E. So there's 4 availability zones, in US East that we can actually utilize there. The other thing that's important about availability zones also is in some cases Amazon may release new services or new features to a service. Maybe it's a new type of instance in EC2, for example, but they may not necessarily be available in all of the availability zones day one. So it's something just to keep in mind. You may actually have to use a specific availability zone to get a specific feature, but it's typically more rare, but worth knowing. So let me jump back to the slides here for a moment. The other thing to note, the availability zone is isolated, but they are connected through these low latency links as well. So, it's not going to be a latency issue by using multiple availability zones. So, one of the things I see a lot of is, you might design an application with a database that replicates from one availability zone to another, like a read replica, and that, okay, if that availability zone goes down, the primary one, you're going to have you can be sure that the RTO and the RPO in the second availability zone was sufficient to kind of get your disaster recovery back online. And I believe Tim Carr is going to be going through some of that in the next session. But that really kind of covers those. Next on the list then really is VPCs, and think of these as, again, kind of your own data center inside of Amazon's cloud. So it's a virtual private cloud is the acronym. You'll create these, and then you can decide to provision into those specific VPCs, and I'll show you that in a little more detail when we get to kind of Amazon EC2 provisioning. And Chris, if I'm not mistaken, I believe you're going through that in your in detail in your session, how to kind of create one, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, cool. Direct connect. So I think the next thing to know from a connectivity standpoint is a lot of us just connect to Amazon through the internet today. Certainly when I was first experimenting with it, that was the main way. I'd say when I talk to a lot of our customers, there's 2 ways they do it, right? Sometimes they go through the internet through some kind of secure tunnel, or they do the direct connect, and it really just depends how mature they are. So direct connect really is connecting to AWS without using the internet connection. Typically you'll have like a dark fiber connection, and you'll work with the the providers to kind of establish that. Next one is Route 53 or Route 53, depending on where you come from. And this one really kind of a clue in the name, anyway. It's port 53 is DNS, so they, instead of naming it Route 66, they call it Route 53. And apparently that is a, I heard from someone that's a legitimate interview question as well. If you
I heard that too. I didn't get that one though.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why that makes or breaks whether you get hired, but somebody.
You're out. What?
Okay, so networking, right? Let's jump into EC2 and some of the compute things. Yeah, so I think the best way to think of EC2 is, honestly, first, just think of it like if you manage a VMware vSphere environment today or Hyper-V environment, these are your virtual servers that you can provision. And so to get to EC2, again, I'll jump over to Amazon itself. Here's our dashboard that you can see, and just to get to, you click this top left icon here, you'll see under compute. So these categories are following the exact same categories I'm going through in the PowerPoint presentation, and you'll see we have Amazon EC2 for basically virtual servers in the cloud, and essentially they're just hosting it for you, right? Instead of you having to go and buy blades and storage and everything else, Amazon's gonna host these instances for you. To create one, it's simply a case of clicking the launch instance icon here, And what you'll see, there's a number of steps you go through. And I guess just to point out very quickly, we're doing everything through the GUI here as well. Amazon has a full command line interface and API, rich API set. So, typically, when I think of cloud, I think of more, ultimately when you're going to launch it in your business, you're going to create a service catalog and you're going to present Amazon services to your customers. You're not going to have them go into the AWS GUI, necessarily, but it's worth noting that everything we do here, I'd understand it from the GUI first and then look at, CloudFormation templates and things to actually provision instances. But once you're in here, so let's say we want to launch a new EC2 instance. First thing we do is choose an Amazon image, right? So, there's a whole bunch of them here, and you can see, a number of them are free tier eligible. If you keep, going down and looking at other services, you'll see some you have to pay for. But for now, we'll just take like a Windows 2012 base in this case, and you can see the next thing it asks us is, okay, well, how do I choose the instance type here? So, in this case, this free tier, I don't want to keep paying for the stuff. So, typically in demos we use the free tier. But as you get higher and higher, it's more CPUs, more memory, etc. that you can basically consume. And this brings up a good question. When I talk to a lot of customers, I used to, in VMware, you could give somebody, okay, they want 3 CPUs and 4 gig of RAM. You can get very specific. In Amazon, you're basically picking the sizes. So what I often hear people do if you're doing multi-cloud, like you're offering on-premises and Amazon, is try to offer the same, what we consider T-shirt sizes, if you will. So you can offer the same vSphere sizes as you offer Amazon sizes, and kind of just guide them in the same world, on-premises and in the public cloud. The other thing to know here as well is you'll see like the instance storage that you have here, elastic block storage there, and then you have kind of SSD options as well. So you can see there's a lot of flexibility in just the types of instances that you can choose. But in this case, I'm just going to choose, one vCPU, it's a 2.5 gigahertz Xeon, 1 gig of memory, and then move on to the next section here. I'm not going to go into all the detail of the networking here because that is going to be covered later on. But number of quick things to cover though, just the number of instances that you can launch into potentially what's called an auto-scaling group. So this is where you can say, okay, well if this particular server in the auto-scaling group hits a certain threshold or certain CPU event in CloudWatch, which I'll talk about later on, then it can auto-scale up and down. So you're allowing Amazon to just increase and decrease the amount of instances as needed. Purchasing options, so there's 3 types. Again, they're going to be covered in the future topics, but just to very quickly mention, there's the typical on-demand that we're doing here. Spot effectively allows you to play the market a little bit, with how much you want to pay for your instances. And then reserved is what I certainly see a lot of companies go, well, at least they reserve a certain amount of capacity, so it's kind of more predictable cost, but Amazon gives you a discount because you're kind of guaranteeing a spend in a certain instance types. And then looking at networking, you can kind of see these are our VPCs that I can decide to provision my EC2 instance into. Same with subnets, and you can see here as well, it's showing us the different availability zones. So we've got the US East, but we've got 1C, 1D, 1E, 1A, and so a number of other pieces here that will get covered in future areas. And in storage, again, this is EBS storage that you'll add here. So this is block storage, and this is where you add it. So if we want to add new volumes, we can do that. But for all intents and purposes, think of this as kind of like the VMDKs that you add onto your vSphere instances. And then a couple more areas. I'm not going to go too much into detail because we've got a lot more pieces to cover. But I definitely want to mention tagging. I'd say one of the biggest mistakes I see in Amazon, launches at the same time, and certainly this will come up, on the exam as questions around tagging is, how are you going to maintain all these instances when they're launched? Like who owns them? Who's using them, right? And if you don't start tagging very early, I would say that it can become a big mess very quickly. My colleagues in the use our lab. I think we're pretty clear. This is a fundamental thing that we have to adhere to, or else it just gets out of control very, very quickly. So I'll just pause there quickly, maybe, Chris, to see if there's any questions on EC2, maybe, before we kind of get into some of the other compute services.
No, we're good for EC2. Graham said, "Thank you for saying on-premises rather than on-premise."
Oh yeah. passionate people about that. So.
Right, right. Actually, one kind of a segue question, which is interesting. Which programming language do you recommend to learn for a person with zero programming knowledge, which will help the most with AWS SA as well as in future AWS certs? I was tossed up between Python, Ruby, or JavaScript, but I wanted to defer to you.
Well, I think we can go down to two, and then we can phone a friend, right? So I'd say Python or JavaScript's where I would probably go. I'd probably lean Python if I had to say today, just because when you're creating Lambda functions, Python's a great way to just.
Is it? Okay, cool.
JavaScript I just see in so many cloud management tools, like the Cisco suites, the VMware suites, and all of those coming out. But then I also see Ruby too, and things like RightScale. So. Yeah, it's a tough one, but I think just learning one like Python, you're going to very quickly be able to pick up the others anyway. So if you haven't picked one at all yet, then maybe I'd probably lean towards Python if I was starting again today.
Yeah.
I'd say historically I started in the JavaScript area in this space, but I'd probably go Python today.
Cool. Okay. And Ankit had another question. Do you have a best practice for tagging? That's a whole can of worms right there. But that's do you have a best practice for
tagging? Hold that question. Maybe I'll try and get back to it at the end of this time. But I'll make a note here as well, and we'll try to address it. Yeah, we could probably talk for about an hour just on tagging, by the way. But
right.
But it's super important. Yeah. But I'll definitely come back to it at the end.
Cool. Actually, one more fast one popped up. Graham is asking any reason to avoid PowerShell.
I don't think so. I mean, I think PowerShell is very popular, and you can still do a lot of PowerShell with AWS. So I wouldn't say avoid it by any means. I just I think you're probably going to. A lot of people I know just know PowerShell on the side anyway. I guess even I came from a Windows background, and sort of PowerShell I've used very often. I've used PowerCLI very often, and I don't think there's any harm in learning PowerShell at all. Cool. I think it's a great language. Very useful still today, and it's certainly I'd say. If you're going to do Azure as well, potentially, and obviously we're focusing today on AWS Cert, but I would say, nothing wrong with learning it at all. It's very useful.
Cool. All right, we are clear, sir. Thank you.
All right, let's keep trucking along here. So I'm not going to do any demos on EC2 container service, and I don't think there's too much on it on the exam, Chris, if I remember correctly. I know it was recently added, so
I didn't run any.
Yeah, exactly, and I'd say it's really Amazon now today is saying, okay, well, instead of you having to go and deploy a container hosting service, they'll host it for you, and you can deploy your Docker containers directly into it. So I think it's certainly powerful and a great way to experiment with containers as well day one without having to set up any container infrastructure on premises if you don't want to. Not that that's particularly difficult, but Amazon certainly sees there's a gap there. Elastic Beanstalk's really, really interesting, and and I really like it from a standpoint of this is a way a developer can very quickly launch like a web application. So same area on the Amazon console, and if we go into Elastic Beanstalk, we actually use it. We've got like an app we demo in house, and it's called our AWS Bag app. And what you'll see, I'm not going to kind of provision the whole app now, but you'll see kind of our application versions here listed. Effectively, all we do is we bundle up our application. In this case, it's a Python application that we actually have. We zip it up, and we basically upload it to Amazon, to Elastic Beanstalk, I should say. Then what we can do is we can basically launch an entire, just create an instance, if you will. Instead of like worrying about servers and storage and everything, all of the specifications exist in Elastic Beanstalk. And Amazon provisions all the underlying infrastructure as well. Now they do this for Python applications, Java applications, .NET applications, that's IIS in particular, and actually just .NET in general. I'm trying to think of the others that they have, but I think PHP's on there as well. So think kind of web applications. And instead of you having to go and set up a server and set up IIS, you just tell the app developer, hey, you can build your app, and we'll just deploy it straight to Elastic Beanstalk. And then Amazon will actually manage all of the pieces underneath. So, it's going to deploy EC2 instances and everything it needs to kind of maintain that application. However, what they do allow you to do, which is great as well, is even if you deploy everything with Elastic Beanstalk, and then you say, okay, well, Amazon, you deployed that certain EC2 instance under the covers for me. I want to take ownership of that myself. You can do that, and then you start to actually own those servers. One of the big questions that I hear that comes up a lot in this space is, well, what do I do about patching? And so Amazon actually released back in April, I believe it was minor and major security updates to all of the components that they deploy. So if you say a Java update came out and you wanted to deploy it, you can actually tell it, okay, for minor updates on this maintenance window, let's say it's 2 o'clock in the morning, every fourth Wednesday or whatever you decide, it will just go and automatically deploy those updates for you. And then you can say, well, major updates, I want to pull the trigger on those, and then, you'd schedule your changes as well. But it's doing all the patching for you, and I think that's extremely powerful. When we think about as admins how much time we spend trying to schedule that stuff and get downtime and everything, for some of that to be managed, that's not to say there's no risk involved. But this is extremely popular amongst application teams, and I think it's just going to continue to grow as one of the services there. Let's jump into Lambda next, and I think this is another great one. I'd say think of Lambda as a serverless architecture, right? So instead of building a server and then saying you want to execute some program on that server, you kind of know whether it's a Windows or Linux server, you probably know the server name, you log into it, you then execute on it, or you run some tool to execute remotely. But that's ultimately what Lambda is allowing you to do is actually just execute on demand a function. And so a great example of this is making, like, say, a REST call on demand, if you will. So we've got one here called service snow test 1. So I'm going to click this one, and we actually can run test this function out. And what basically it's going to do, let me just kind of jump out of here. Let's run test. There we go. Hit the test here. And what it's basically going to do is execute that function. Now, while it's executing, in fact, it's already done, but I'm going to show you kind of the code for this. So this is basically a Python piece of code that we've written for creating a change control entry in something like ServiceNow. Now, a lot of people probably use things like BMC and CA as well, but great examples. We took this code that that I already had, then modified it specifically for Lambda. So one of the things you have to do, you'll see the section on the top here, is kind of just build this definition so Amazon basically understands it. And then this is basically my Python, my payload. This is basically a REST API call I'm making. And then what happens is now I basically just said, okay, run that piece of code. I don't have to log into a server. I'm not putting that code on a server. I've just uploaded the code to Amazon and said run it. And it's basically executed. I can see successfully I've got a status 201 here. So if I go over to ServiceNow and I just refresh my screen on ServiceNow, we'll see something here, automated change via AWS. Now this particular piece of code, we've written it so it says scaled our bag application due to load. So if we think back to EC2 for a minute, when we talked about auto-scaling groups and how if a certain application comes under load, it can automatically scale and add another instance. Well, that's great, but how do I make a change control record of that? And so this is a great example where you can tie a Lambda function to an Amazon event, where the Amazon event could be like a CloudWatch event that says, the CPU's been exceeded, and then it just goes and adds another EC2 instance automatically because of the auto-scaling group, and writes your change control to an external system now that has absolutely nothing to do, with Amazon, whatsoever. And I think this is where it's extremely powerful. And, I've been talking a lot, actually, at a tech summit a few months ago, I talked a lot about, just how Lambda is, what it means for orchestration, because this is what we consider now event-based orchestration, responding to events and triggering functions that way. So I think this is really exciting for me personally, and I think a lot of people are really jumping on board with it. Let me pause there again for a second, I think, because we just kind of finished compute, and then and see if there's any questions, Chris. Or we're still doing pretty good. I'm gonna have a quick drink of water here.
No. Let me double check all the different feeds. No, we are definitely, you're trucking along fantastically, sir.
Okay, cool. All right, let's jump back to PowerPoint here. So let's compute there. Okay, so jump into the next section, and I believe we've got somebody else presenting on this the next few sessions as well. But let's kind of talk through some of these. So S3, that's the one I'm definitely going to kind of jump back to the console and demo. I think the best way to think of this is a just a bucket to store files. You know, you hear people talk about an S3 bucket. You know, another way to just think about it is really it's just kind of directories. You know, if you think about it back to just your typical file system, if you log into Amazon S3, you know, we'll click on it here, should pop up, you know, kind of jump into it. Let's take this head demo bucket, and it only has one file in it, I believe. But you can see it's just like, you know, you create folders in your buckets, and you've got your typical actions of creating more folders, uploading. I don't know, there's nothing too exciting about it, except to say that it, you know, I mean, it's exciting because it's just available and you can consume it without, you know, having to do anything on the back end at all, really. But I think, you know, it's extremely available. You know, I believe it's up to 2 regions. I can kind of check my notes here. Not regions, sorry, availability zones can go down before it's kind of, you know, offline. Yeah, sorry, lose up to 2 facilities and you'd still have access. The one thing to note on it is there's no OS installs. So, you know, back to EC2, for example, you know, that's block storage. You're still going to use EBS tied to EC2 for deploying your operating systems, but you may use S3 buckets for storing various files and things. And you could kind of see just in, you know, what I brought up there for a second, you know, we use it for all sorts of things. We use it for applications. We've got CloudFormation templates and things, you know, Elastic Beanstalk things stored in there. Some of those are created by Amazon, some are created by us. You know, there's all that's all there. So that's kind of S3. Let me jump back to the PowerPoint now. So CloudFront's very interesting. Effectively a local caching of content. So if you've got something publicly facing in one region and you want something, you know, the experience to be better for people in another region, this is a great way to kind of do some kind of local caching. Glacier is, you know, this is one I'd say that's also very common, and there's a company out there, OneCloud, that's doing a lot with Glacier. But from the Amazon perspective, again, it's really about long-term archival. You know, it's 3 + 5 hours. I think, Chris, it's like 3 to 5 hours, right? That's kind of the bracket they put around it.
Right.
Yeah, okay, cool. And that's to retrieve. So the interesting thing is, if you just got a lot of data that you used to kind of, you know, truck off to things like Iron Mountain on tapes and things, you know, getting it up to Amazon and then maybe moving it from S3 to Glacier, you know, you can't retrieve it as quickly, but you know, it's very cheap, and that's what they're going for there. EFS, a new one, that's basically like NAS in the cloud, block level storage. The one that you'll see kind of, I saw recently, you know, Snowball basically documented pretty heavily, and I think I've got an image here of it, or at least I can find one. But I think this is really interesting because clearly, you know, Amazon realized like getting lots and lots of data, you know, into Amazon, or even getting the data out and sending it back to you, you know, it can be a challenge, or, you know, people have concerns about it today. And so Snowball is really their answer to that. It's this giant briefcase of basically hard drives. It arrives, and you basically, you know, plug it in, you know, and connect it to your network, and then, you know, access it. But, you know, it's interesting because it's this, you know, very, you know, safe briefcase, if you will. You know, it's nothing's going to get broken in there, and it even detects tampering attempts and things like that as well. So, you know, that's basically what it looks like on screen there. But that's pretty interesting. Other ones we've got there, storage gateway. So this is a VM that you run locally that, you know, you can just use, and then it replicates your data from your local data center to AWS. And that's pretty much it for storage now. I mean, you know, I think this is an area they've always had a strong, you know, footprint. I think, you know, on the exam, certainly EFS is new, and you're not going to be asked about it there, but pretty much all the others. CloudFront, Chris, can you remember on the exam? I think at the very least need to know about it, right? I don't think it's too detailed, but everything else.
Yeah, just the broad strokes. There wasn't anything that they didn't get too deep into, you know, timings or latencies or anything like that.
Yeah, so I'd say S3, Glacier, definitely need to know inside out.
Yep.
Snowball to a degree, but again, very glossed over. EFS, don't worry about. And then storage gateway, certainly need to know about that one as well. So, okay, so that's moving off storage. Let's you know, talk a little bit about databases. So, you know, I think if we think about where we are in the layers and what we've talked about so far, we've kind of been, okay, well, I might deploy an EC2 instance and deploy an OS, and then I might install SQL IS on it, you know, if I'm not using Beanstalk. But let's say I don't want to deploy a SQL server, but I still want a relational database, and I just don't want to manage SQL anymore. In that case, what I can do is use something like RDS, which is Amazon's relational database, and just consume it. I would define my schema and everything that I would define in SQL. But in this case, I'm just saying, Amazon, you host this, and I'll pay the premium for that. DynamoDB, is basically their NoSQL equivalent. For anyone who's not familiar with NoSQL, very much, it just looks like almost like a flat file of text, if you will. But it's a very common way, and for certain data structures and data types, we see a lot of that now. Elasticache is in-memory caching of databases. Redshift is your data warehousing. So in some cases, if you have Oracle kind of data warehouses and things, I've heard some people move those to Redshift. And then DMS is their database migration services. So it's supposed to make getting into Amazon very, very simple. If you've got like a SQL server and you want to move it to RDS, you might use one of the DMS services for that. Analytics, again, this is where I would say I've probably got less hands-on experience. I think a lot of people have kind of done this kind of on the app side, but I can talk about a few cases and certainly what these technologies are. But EMR is Elastic MapReduce, so that's your managed Hadoop clusters, and this is the one where I would say I've seen people say, well, I don't want to necessarily run an experiment on premises to just see if I'm going to use something like this. You can just go a failed experiment in Amazon for $10,000 or $20,000 on EMR. Isn't that bad when you consider how much it would cost to fail that on premises. So Elastic MapReduce is their big data option. Data pipeline allows you to move data between services. Elasticsearch, this one's very common as well. So again, this is a search analytics engine. Elasticsearch is pretty common out there from the open source side. And again, this is Amazon's hosted implementation of that. Kinesis is your managed service platform for real-time streaming of big data. Machine learning is the other interesting one. So if you think about when you go to Amazon's website and then you buy something, and then the next time you go there, it's recommending 10 or 15 different products for you at the bottom. Well, they actually use this technology on their website, and they've just decided they're making it available for people as well. And then QuickSight, which is your business intelligence service, that's not in the test at all, but that's also in the analytics category. Security and identity, this is another section here. So IAM definitely will be on there. I think we're covering that in the third session. And that's, definitely make sure you understand this, learn about multi-factor authentication. This is one that you're going to have to kind of dig in deep on. But pretty much, it's users, it's roles, it's access, it's how do people get access to Amazon, because, security is such a top concern, and so they're making sure everybody has a background in it there. Directory services, Active Directory basically, in AWS, and we got kind of your trusted advisor service. This is really a way of having Amazon look at all of your instances that are running and try and look for ways to reduce cost basically. So it's like instead of you, not saying you completely get out of this, but instead of you sort of paying somebody to kind of look through your instances and tell you if you should be using reserved instances on EC2, this is something that can kind of do that for you. Web application firewall, definitely a big one to kind of be aware of. And this, this just allows you to, add security to your web applications. So if you deploy something in Amazon, you can add these string matches and SQL injection matches and all these things, and it's going to give you a lot of security there. Cloud HSM is not on the test, but it's your hardware security module, but definitely you need to kind of just know about it. But again, it's glossed over, but nothing in detail. And certificate manager as well. So that's kind of what you got in the security space. This, I guess I'll pause there again real quick, because probably covered 3 categories there. Any other big questions? Did we jump into management here?
I actually had a pretty tough WAF question on the exam. I would encourage people to read the white paper on the WAF bits, just to make sure that they understand all of the different matching criteria possibilities that you can use. As well, I mean, obviously read all the white papers, but take copious notes.
There you go. Do we have that in the vBrownbag session coming up? Is that?
I think we do have a bit on speaking to the security particulars. Honestly, I've been concentrating on the part that I'm trying to do, so I haven't looked at everybody else's stuff.
All right. Well, let's hit some management tools here, because I think there's a lot in this space. And let me jump straight into kind of CloudWatch first of all. which I think is a good one to kind of hit out of there. Let me find Amazon console here. So here we go. So CloudWatch is really kind of think of it just as a monitoring service that's, freely available to you. You can create alarms, again, green, yellow, red, typical, traffic light system that you have here, and then various rules and things that basically happen in response. You can see, just to kind of, talk through what we did with Lambda earlier on, we saw I created that change control automatically. Well, that's again created via a CloudWatch rule basically, and you can kind of see the event pattern here. So we're looking at when AutoScaling takes effect. Here's the detail type that we're looking for, and here's the AutoScaling group name. And so this one's enabled, and you can see we've kind of written a description here. This is our AutoScaling event triggers that fire a REST call to document the action, and then you can see we've got our Lambda function snow test 1. That's our target. So when that event happens, this is your target. Go and do this, and then basically Lambda will run in response to that. And so it's a great way to kind of get some metrics. I can actually also show this from a kind of a demo standpoint in a video here or two that's kind of pre-recorded just from a demo. So in this case, I've got a bag application. This is just, when I say bag app, by the way, that's just it's a dummy application that deploys a bag tracking application. So if you're flying from DC to Chicago and you check your bag in, it tells you where it is. It's just something we built internally. But if we look at this, I've got 4 instances running right now, and then what I'm going to do is go over to this load tester, which is Locust, and start a test on those web servers. So I'm simulating 2,000 users here with a hatch rate of 250 users a second, and now it starts swarming. I love the names of this tool. Now we're hatching users and everything. So rates per second. There we go. So you can see the failures, and I've kind of jumped ahead here for time. You can see we're getting failures now on that web application. So now if we go over to CloudWatch, and that's actually a previous chart you see. Now I'll refresh it here, and you'll see actually the difference. So you see we're still tracking normally. On this CloudWatch, this is the number of requests I'm tracking. If I keep refreshing it, you'll see it takes about a minute. You can see that massive jump in the blue line, and that's showing CloudWatch is saying, well, look, I'm detecting this increase in number of requests. Well, because those instances are in an auto-scaling group, you can already see on the bottom there, you see that one initializing. It's already adding another node. If I go over to the bag app, it's still functioning again now because it's automatically added another instance, and it's able to still keep up with the demand. And then if we go back to EC2, you'll kind of see here as it's refreshing again here, we're actually up to 6 instances running now at this time. And if we go even a little bit further, I'm going to jump through here. You can kind of see in ServiceNow again, that automated change that got created in response to that Lambda event, the CloudWatch event that triggered a Lambda function. And again, I think that just kind of shows you, the power of CloudWatch, and you can set all sorts of alarms. And if we just want to kind of look at our major alarms, we can see them here. These are them there. And, there's various data points. Again, there's request counts. So you can kind of set these thresholds. So, and again, telling it what to do when you go below, what to do when you go above, right? So when you go below, do you take down an instance? When you go above, do you add an instance? All those kind of things there. So that's, there's going to be a lot on CloudWatch, so definitely just kind of play around with it. I'd say this is probably the one where just getting in here and playing in particular is probably the easiest way to get through it. So with that said, that's kind of monitoring there. Let's jump into CloudFormation. So CloudFormation really is a way to, automatically deploy a stack, right? So instead of you going in and launching EC2 and then add in an S3 bucket, just think of any Amazon constructs you want to add. I would do it manually first, and then go and create a CloudFormation template for it as well. CloudTrail, this is another one that comes up a lot, is because how do you kind of audit and all the API activity, right? If we're starting to do all these things that are automated, how do I go and view them? And CloudTrail is really that place, to track the user and the API activity. Then we got kind of config. This is sort of interesting because when you sort of read the descriptions and go through it and play with it, it sounds very much like Puppet, but very AWS focused at this point. But when you think about what they have got, which is OpsWorks, this is Amazon's automation that effectively uses Chef. Basically, it's their hosted chef service, I guess, is another way to think about it. So, I'll kind of hit this at the end as well on how we deploy applications, but definitely, just a great way to say, okay, I don't just want to, provision an EC2 instance. I actually want to put my application on top of it. Opsworks is a great way to do that if you're not going to use something like Elastic Beanstalk. And then Service Catalog is really, a new catalog service that Amazon created, so it's sort of like a self-service portal you can go to. Okay, so application services. You can see there's a lot here. I hope everyone is still with me. It's kind of just, you just got to digest them all as best you can, and just kind of. I don't think there's any other way to go through this.
Yeah, it's tough. They're all holding in here. They're troopers.
All right. All right, awesome. So API gateway, very much if you want to expose your own API, so you could take like that Lambda function. Let's say I wanted to actually, instead of using it internally, I wanted to offer it externally as a web service. I could take that Lambda function and create an API for it using an API gateway. AppStream is basically your Amazon equivalent of things like XenApp, right? So when you stream in an application, you're not like actually executing it locally. It's sort of just streaming the presentation down to you. And that's what AppStream does. Cloud Search is their managed search solution. So think of search functions and a lot of websites you go today, and you fill them in, and it kind of comes up with immediate search results and things like that. That's their offering for that. Elastic Transcoder. Don't believe that's on the exam either, but it's a media transcoding service. So if you want to, exactly do that, change a media file from one format to another, video and audio. Then we have things like simple email service, sending and receiving emails, simple queuing service, simple workflow in service. These are heavy on the developer certifications. You'll certainly need to be aware of them on the solutions architect certifications. But these are effectively, instead of somebody building, say, a message bus. Or let's say when somebody goes to a website and does a certain activity and they wanted to execute a workflow that then goes out to a bunch of workers, the simple workflow service allows you to do that and is available there. I'm not going to go through any of these developer tools. I'll give you a quick highlight on them. They're absolutely not in the test at all. There's code commit, which is basically GitHub. Code deploy automates code deployment, and code pipeline is like your CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, build, test, and deploy code. Mobile services ago, none of these are in the test from Mobile Hub. Cognito is not in there. Device Farm is not in the test, but it's worth pointing out. I think this is a really interesting one because it allows you, let's say you're building an application for iPhone or Android or something like that, and you want to test it on a real device instead of on just your software development kit that you're using and IDEs, etc. This actually allows you to, push your app to a real device and, actually use it and test it out that way. And then finally, the one that is there, though, is the simple notification service. And this is the way just to kind of push notifications. So think of push services that you see today, very mobile friendly. You can just send these notifications, directly from the cloud. These ones are in the exam, and I think these are great. I'll cover the bottom two, and then I'll kind of show Amazon Workspaces here. But WorkDocs is basically Dropbox, so people are used to OneDrive and Google Drive, same kind of thing. And then Workmail is, their Exchange service, effectively, that they've started to offer as well, their mail service. But Workspaces in particular, this is one that Amazon's definitely pushing heavily. You'll see a lot of it on the exam, and it's just just seeing a lot of growth in general. So if you go to kind of Amazon Workspaces here, hopefully my desktop's still provisioned, or else we can. Yep, still there. This is basically a place where you can launch a desktop for somebody. So instead of you having to host things like Citrix and Desktop and VMware View, you can basically just consume it directly from Amazon, and they'll provision one for you. What happens is once you've kind of provisioned it, they give you a website to go to. So this desktop's provision. Here's my client link, which I can grab, and here's my registration code. This is actually the computer name. So this Windows computer is obviously provisioned in Amazon, but I can take this link, clients.amazonworkspaces.com, punch it into my web browser. And one of the things to just do, you can see this is where you download the client. So immediately it actually popped to Mac OS. It knows what OS I'm coming from. You download the client, which I'll launch in a moment. But one of the things at the bottom that's worth noting is this connection status check. So we can click this, and what it'll actually do is run a check against all the Amazon regions to tell you which one it recommends you utilize for your Amazon desktop. So again, in this case, if I'm going to use my desktop, if I use US East, North Virginia, my round trip time from my Mac where I am right now, in Illinois is 47 milliseconds to basically connect to that desktop. But if I went to Singapore, you can kind of see it's going to be 214. So I think this is pretty powerful in itself that we got there. To actually launch it, though, once you got the client, let's just jump up to workspaces here. It's effectively just like a typical VDI client. I punch it in and then log in here. Hopefully I can remember my password for this. I haven't logged into it in a little while, but there we go. So it's launching here, and then up it comes, and now I have a VDI desktop just like any other. So I think this is great if you just want to, actually if you just want to give your grandparents or someone a desktop and a terminal that they can't break, it's probably a good use as well. Something you'd have to manage it for somebody. It's I don't know. I can see a ton of uses for this. But yeah, that's Amazon Workspaces. That'll definitely be on your exam. And so that, there's one more area to cover, and then we'll kind of get onto some of the theory of things. But Internet of Things, it's not in the test, but definitely a huge growth area, and it probably will be soon. In the next wave of exams. So certainly just have a glance at it if you get time. So I'll just pause here. Now that was a very quick, but hopefully we kind of hit a little bit of detail on some of the services. But if you kind of look at the grid, there's a lot there. I think just make sure you have a base understanding of all the ones that are in the exam, and then hit in detail on the ones that we'll continue to cover through the brown bag. But if you're not familiar with AWS, hopefully this part at least was a good overview, and then hopefully you can just kind of dig in deeper and deeper and just find ways you can stitch services together. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to go talk a little bit about kind of planning and how you deploy applications using services. I think that's sort of important, is how do you use them even if you know about them. But let me pause there and pause. Any questions again, Chris?
Mr. Malhoy, were you talking to Graham?
I do, in fact. There are two questions. One is, does Amazon deal with the Microsoft licensing for any instances you start up, or do the customers have to deal with that themselves still?
Oh, on the workspaces side, yeah. So I don't have the answer to that right now, but we can post that one on the website. I believe they do. When they spin it up, it's not like a Win 7 desktop. It's like if you've seen what they do, it's like 2008 R2 or 2012, for example. But I want to get you an accurate answer on that, so we can post a reply on the website if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And one other question, Nick, while you're hesitating, can you tie workspaces to specific VPCs?
You can, yes.
And that was another question from Graham. Or no, I'm sorry, from Gabe.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Well, let's. Yeah, I'll get that answer to you on the other one there. But I'll just try. And I'll definitely want to still hit tag, and I've got it still noted here to kind of hit as we get through. But I think just an app, from an app deployment and just approach for building IT services. I think this is kind of a procedure that I certainly work through a lot. As there's kind of this onboarding approach to which services from Amazon am I going to consume first, right? So first thing to do is just prioritize it like you do anything else. Talk to the software development team, see what makes the most sense. Certainly you're probably going to start out on like EC2, S3, and just familiarity there. Next thing is really standardizing, right? If you just look at those Amazon AMI files for EC2, there's thousands of them there, right? It's different images, different templates you can provision from. So you've got to kind of start to build a matrix of just things that you're going to consume from Amazon and how you're going to offer those in turn back out to your consumers of IT. Or if you're giving it to a developer and they're going to use Elastic Beanstalk, how can they just log in and consume Elastic Beanstalk? So if you're kind of the Amazon admin, you've got to kind of think of your customers. Your developers are going to want to just get very quick access. They want to deploy. They're hungry to get things up and running, AutoScaling, all those things. And infrastructure teams, trying to kind of learn this sort of new world, if you will, compared to the management they've had before on premises. Then it's kind of create procedures, do it manually, and then automate it. So I would say everything you do in Amazon, try to wrap a CloudFormation template around it. So at least you you have a reproducible way of just creating that again without having to go through the GUI. I think that's just a great way to kind of, as you dive into Amazon. And then finally, publish. If you're going to use a cloud management platform, publish it, or maybe you're going to publish it via like an API gateway as an external service, but decide how it gets consumed. If it's manual, if it's automated, if it's under cloud management, I'd say decide on that. I think also just look at this is a very infrastructure as a service approach. If you think of this bag app that I've been talking about, the way we deploy here is, we have, if you think of these as EC2 containers in this case, but these could be VMware VMs or Azure VMs, but doing it this way in Amazon allows you a lot of portability. And the design of this allows us to say, okay, I'm going to deploy one node with a SQL server, so I'm going to do a MySQL server, and I'm going to do an app server. What I do is I deploy these using Amazon, so this is the EC2 instances with CentOS 7, and then I use OpsWorks to lay down all of those modules inside of that. So it could be Chef or Puppet as well, but just for the sake of an Amazon certificate, would be certification, it would be OpsWorks. And think of these little tiny, blue boxes, the light-colored ones, as things you would manually log into the server and then install. You deployed EC2, or how do I get everything installed to make that app work? And you just keep working up the stack, right? So some of these are kind of infrastructure focused, and then all the way up to the the production side of the application, and then the same on the right. We deployed firewall profiles and things. We deployed MarlaDB and its open source PCR, and then we deployed our bag app schema and data there. And so that's infrastructure as a service. The next option might be, well, okay, well, I don't want to do, I want to get out of the business again of managing SQL. So what if I want to start to mix? And you can absolutely do that. So you can say on the right-hand side, I'm going to do I'm going to replace that EC2 instance, and I'm just going to offer an AWS RDS service in this case. On the left-hand side, I'm still doing my EC2 instance for the web server, and I'm deploying all of those modules using OpsWorks. So again, you've got kind of a mixed IaaS and PaaS version here. Then you can go all in, right? So you could say, well, I'm actually going to just deploy, I don't want to manage EC2 at all, I'm going to replace that EC2 and all the pieces I had there, and I'm just going to use Elastic Beanstalk to deploy that entire application. So you can see there's kind of just a lot of options, and you've really got to kind of look at, well, what's the cost of managing that piece manually? Do I want to do it, do I want to build it myself, or do I want Amazon to manage it? And that's really kind of a design decision and also a cost decision as well, and priorities with your team and what they want to manage versus what you want to just pay for an external service provider like AWS to manage. The other thing to think about from a design consideration is really around auto-scaling that we kind of hit before as well. So if you think of the availability zones, if you look on the bottom here, this is that same application again, but what we've got on the left-hand side, and sorry, my slides must have an automated timer on there or something, but on the left-hand side, we've got these web app instances, over there. We put them in this auto-scaling group, which you can see using Elastic Load Balancer. So, it's scaling up and down instances like I kind of mentioned earlier. But what do we want to do in case of failure is we've designed this application, we've architected it for AWS for failure. So in this case, we've got everything running in US West 1, but we're doing replication over to US East 1. And we've got an RDS read replica over there as well. We're using Amazon Route 53 to kind of coordinate everything through to the ELBs. Now, what's happening now is if this left region, US West 1, fails, what happens is US East 1 can now just become the primary, and we start US West 2 now, because it's US West 1, we presume it's still unavailable. It's basically, US West 2 now becomes the replica. And so this is just a fundamental great way, from an architecture standpoint to get sort of an immediate benefit from Amazon. If you just think of the disaster recovery planning and everything and all the systems we'd have to touch on premises to do something like this, doing this in AWS is, far, far easier. And so this is a great model there. And obviously all provisioned using CloudFormation templates as well. And so I guess, before I end off, the final thing I would just say with all of this is a slide I kind of use a lot, and it's, really around, I used to joke kind of 5 years ago, when I was kind of working on an automation project, if somebody said it couldn't be done, I'd sort of talk to them and be like, we just put a rover on Mars this year, right? How can you say you can't automate backups or do something like that? And today I've kind of moved on. It's kind of a SpaceX just landed a rocket vertically on a pad out in the middle of the ocean. So I think it's, I always have this motto of challenge everything. It doesn't mean what you come out with is going to be perfect, but at least let's look at it and experiment often. And I think Amazon, for me personally, kind of getting into it just as a place to experiment and explore and try new things. You know, it's all available, and so even if you're going down a path of making Amazon enterprise ready, just going through the certification and just learning and playing with all of the different pieces of it, I think is just powerful in itself, and you'll just learn new ways to kind of piece things together.
Exactly.
And so with that, Chris, I've wrapped up the presentation here. So
that was, dude, exactly 61 minutes. Bam.
Oh yeah.
Excellent.
It was awesome too.
Yeah, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. Let me ask the attendees any last questions real fast. We're not going to have a chance to get into Ankit's question about best practices for tagging instances. That's a giant can of worms, Ankit. Honestly, Google best practices for tagging. It all depends upon your business, your use cases, what it is that you want to see, what are the things that are important to the users. Nick, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, the part of that. Yeah, and sorry, I meant to mention that. You know, I keep telling you I had it written down here. I never got to it, right? But yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. There's sort of, no, I'll just kind of mention the high level because to Chris's point that we could talk for an hour on this. There's sort of the drivers for tags in themselves, right? So there's show back and charge back as a mechanism, right? Why? And there's project codes. There's who's building the system. There's who's actually, you know, who does the system belong to? Who's managing the system? And so all of these things are really important. And so typically I would say tagging is a combination of what do I need to tag in Amazon and what do I also need to tag and update in my CMDB, whether it's ServiceNow, BMCCA, whatever you decide to do there. And so ultimately, once you kind of decide what are those drivers are, what is your operational method for managing Amazon, and how are you going to report on it, how are you going to do events off it, you know, and again, it's an exercise, and I'd say it's probably the most important, well, one of the most important exercises in Amazon. Once you've got all of that, you'll end up with this matrix basically of, you know, key value pairs. As I'm going to need to know, you know, this from every single thing that I build, and there's tagging across EC2, tagging across networking pieces, you know, tagging across all different elements in AWS, as well as other things you still may potentially connect with on-premises. So I think that exercise, I think it shows a lot of what's going on in the business in itself, and what you come out with it is actually a simple list at the end. So it might sound overly complicated what I'm saying, but then once you've got that list, then you basically go to work and you make sure you apply those tags and apply them in an automated way. So it's not like, oh, I've agreed to do this tagging, but somebody's got to actually, you know, go into the GUI, find that item, and tag it manually, because then it won't be successful.
Nice. And Ankit actually posted an answer to the question for the workspaces licensing in the vBrownbag feed. So if you guys look on Twitter and look under hashtag vBrownbag, you'll see Ankit's reference. It's basically the workspaces FAQ that gives the answer for the licensing. So that takes care of that question as well. And Alphonse Coleman said the class was awesome. Thanks, Nick.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. And yeah, hit me up on Twitter. I look forward to the next session. So you know, I'm excited for the series, and you know, thanks to the vBrownbag team for putting this together, because I think it's the most exciting series I've seen come out on Brownbag. So I think it's awesome.
Yay! Awesome. Excellent. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.